Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In Talk Radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
I can't hear. There we go. Okay. I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. Today we have a guest. His name is James Carr. He is a free market thinker and ran for Congress in the 7th Congressional District, state of Virginia. And we'd like to hear his thoughts not only about running for office, why he did so, some of the obstacles he faced, and the obstacles, I guess, that the voters faced as well. You know, voting for a third party. I think he ran under the Libertarian ticket. Unfortunately, here in the state of Oklahoma, we are not recognized as a political party because the powers that be will not allow it unless we get like millions of signatures. And the whole state's got to be libertarian in order to become a libertarian. And we share one thing. I ran for as a libertarian in the 2000 general election, first district of Tulsa. Anyway. Welcome very much, James, to the Liberty Talk Radio. Thank you so much for being on our program.
Oh, good morning. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. James, I've been where you've been twice before, and I'd like to hear what was the impetus behind you running for office, and what was your experience, and how did it affect you?
Well, for years, I had my own blog, as a matter of fact, but I've been a political thinker. I have very close friends on opposite sides of any political spectrum you can put up. That's how I've always been. I've been the one that, if you talk to some of my friends who are ultra-conservative, they call me a flaming liberal. And if you talk to my very liberal friends, they think I'm a neocon because I don't fit either of the molds, right. So they didn't know where to put me. And as sad as it is, not enough people understand the idea of libertarianism really not fitting into either of those buckets. So for years, I was trying to articulate my positions and trying to explain to people why you didn't have to accept part and parcel these packages that were presented to you by these major parties. And I finally got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore, and I think it was in large part due to having children. So my son is 4.5, he'll be 5 in June, and I've got twin 2.5-year-old girls.
Wow.
So when I decided to run for office, take a year off of that, and we've got a 3.5-year-old boy and a half-year-old twin girls running around. It was not a fun decision to make to try to run for office and all that entails. You know about the demands on your time. At the same time, I couldn't sit back and just spend my evenings frustrated at the situation and not actually trying to do anything. So I said, well, let's prove. One of the problems is everybody thinks you have to be a well-established politician or pretty much independently wealthy to run for office. I said, no, I'm going to prove that you can be, working full-time, father, husband, and run for office. Present your eyes out there and run a credible campaign. So that's what I did. I didn't give up my job. I worked all day, campaigned in the evenings and every weekend all year long. And it was amazing to hear how people really embraced that they wanted someone. They wanted you to prove that it could be done, but most people are waiting for proof in the last election before they'll start voting their mindset now.
Right, yeah.
And that was the most frustrating part, I think, of the entire experience, other than being away from family for a year.
Right. Well, did you find that the voters in the state of Virginia are as confused as most voters are around the country, in that they want to believe what is occurring, is what is being said by the mainstream Republican and Democrat Party are correct, but they know it's not right, but they just can't seem to wrap their arms around what is really and when they hear the right answer, they become skeptics and almost cynical in a way. And that's what I found. I found that they, in fact, I had one woman, after a debate, and I did very well in the debate, a woman came up to me. She must have been 80 years old, and almost as old as me. And she came up to me and she said, "That was wonderful. I agreed with everything you said. You were fabulous." And then she followed it by saying, "But I'm sorry, I can't vote for you. I'm a Democrat." And I didn't argue with her. I said, "Well, thank you very much for the compliment. I appreciate." Walked away, and I said, "Therein lies the mentality of the United States." And now this is the year 2000, so this is 15 years ago. And I always say, and I repeat this over in my head, I agree with you. You're right. They're wrong, but I have to vote Democrat. How do we get around that? I mean, it seems to be pervasive.
Well, it is, and what's sad is you'll hear more people saying, "I agree with you" more on any of the issues. They'll actually look at your positions, they'll evaluate them and say that you are the candidate that most represents my views.
Right.
But you can't win.
That's right.
And what I've said, because I started off originally saying, well, I appreciate that you agree with me, the niceties. As the campaign wore on, I realized that isn't getting us anywhere. We have to point out a lot of these hypocrisies, and we have to do it in a way that you don't offend someone, but where you make it clear, you start to force them to evaluate that cognitive dissonance that they have, because they don't process it, they don't even understand that it's there. And one woman came up in particular after the only event where all three candidates on the 7th congressional district ballot we were able to speak. One of the candidates avoided being on the same stage as me like the plague. The other showed up at a few. We had some good conversations.
Yeah. Right.
But a woman comes up to me and says, "You did excellent. Your points were exactly where I'd like to be, but you can't win as a third party, so I have to vote for the lesser of two evils." And I looked at her and said, "Well, I can't win because you're not going to vote for me, because you don't have the courage to vote your mind. How has that worked for you in the past?" And the state of politics is terrible. Everybody knows that. Fine. So keep doing the same thing. And I said, I don't mean to be rude, but you're part of the problem when you won't allow yourself to make the statement.
Yeah.
And you could see she took it a little bit offensive, but she was considering what I said. And we've got to get to a point where we jolt voters awake.
Right. Well, I got to a point at the very last time that I debated for U.S. Congress. I almost made a comedy routine out of it, and it worked out very well. By the way, it did. I enjoyed it. The people enjoyed it, and the whole bit. But unfortunately, you no matter it seems no matter what you say, you can't get any votes because of that mentality. Right now, I saw a poll. I think it was in the Cato Institute, one of their newsletters, that showed that. Over 50% of the people today are not registered or don't consider themselves either Republicans or Democrats. Over 50%. And you would think that a libertarian would be a shoo-in for that reason. But yet, the voting remains the same. And it's that mentality, it's voting for the lesser two evils. And they don't recognize that when you're voting for evil, you're voting for evil. It's your interpretation of which evil you like better. And they can't break away from that. And that about, I guess, discouraged me more than anything else. What tactics did you attempt to use in your dialogue with the public to try to convince them or sway them over to more free mind thinking? And I never used the word libertarian because I used to be on 1170 KFAQ. Whenever they hear libertarian, I used to joke because I have, there's a lot of country bumpkins here in this state. I'm from East Side New York. You can imagine. Everyone knows my accent. And I used to say, "Oh yeah, libertarians. Yeah. You're the lesbian guys like to dance in the street in your dirty underwear. You're disgusting." I mean, that's the mentality. I mean, so I never use the word libertarian because I have no idea what you're talking about. And you say libertarian, they say, "Oh, is he a gay guy or something?" I mean, really, literally, that's what they think. So I just say free market thinker and whatever, and I avoid the term altogether. What tactics did you attempt to use, and which one were you successful with in changing in conveying your message?
Well, I'll tell you, the exact issue that you bring up was something I sought to tackle early on. The idea of, do you understand what it means to be libertarian, right? And the people who had heard of libertarianism normally thought of it as this fringe, anarchist group.
Right.
That was their idea is, oh, you just want to go burn DC down and walk away.
Right.
And
not a bad idea, by the way, but go ahead. If we can always start over again, not a bad idea, but I don't want to interrupt you,
Right. Well, I'm at a point, actually, my license plate is the Gadsden flag license plate that we have in Virginia that says not too late. Because I don't think we're quite at the point where we have to start over. I think we're quickly approaching that, but I still think that there is something salvageable if we as the people would actually take our government back from those in power, stop all the special interests from basically controlling our government. And so I would talk with people, I'd say, well, do you understand what it is that I'm proposing? And most of them say, oh, yeah, you want to raise everything down, you want people to run around and complete anarchy, do whatever they want. I said, well, actually, part of what you said is good, but you're not quite following that thought through. I said, I don't care if people do whatever they want. I said, right up until the point that it hurts someone else. I said, and that's, there's a great quote that says, the right for me to swing my fist ends where the other man's nose begins.
Very good point.
The idea is you can do what you want as long as you are harming no one else.
That's right.
There should be no one to say what you do.
Right.
We've gotten far away from that. We've gotten to the point of a government that wants to control your moral thoughts, wants to control your pocketbook.
Right.
And by controlling your pocketbook, they can tell you what to do in your general life. And when I started pointing some of this out, we would get on specific issues. I say, well, how about, what are the two most important issues to you? And, everybody, it was amazing the different issues that would come up. But the economy came up more than anything else. And so I would say, okay, well, let's start there. Do you think either of the existing parties have a plan that's going to make the economy better? Oh, well, of course the Republicans are better. Or, well, the Democrats are going to infuse money. And I say, okay, these two parties have been in power for how long? When was the last time the economy actually got better using those tactics? And you would say, well, they've never been allowed to really, they have a lot of excuses. And it's, if you're familiar with the idea of these cognitive bias, well, that choice affirmation is out there. Well, I voted for a Republican last time, so I have to promote the idea that the Republicans are trying to do the right thing, unless they really get to a point where they're just shaken away from that thought. And so we would have discussions, and I'd say, well, here's a list of issues. And I would always carry along my little cheat sheet. You pick your two main issues. I'm not going to talk to you after you tell me where you stand. Here's my sheet. How many of those do you agree with where I'm coming from? And how many do you have problems? And we can talk about the problems, but at the end of the day, almost everyone was about 80 to 85% aligned with where I was.
I had the same experience.
And they would say, well, yeah, I actually, one of the problems with their own party, they would start bringing forward this disconnect with their own party, because I really think my party's not addressing this issue correctly or this issue, and you've got that. I said, well, so what you're really saying is you actually agree more with kind of the tenets of individual liberty as a controlling force than you do with your personal party, which doesn't take individual liberty as its driving force.
Right.
It has this predefined set of issues where it's taken a stand, but there's no prevailing principle controlling it. And you would see some people really would start churning through, but most ended in this fear state. Well, but if I vote for you, then there's no way that this person can win, and, well, I can't let the other person win. It's that fear-based voting. So obviously I didn't overcome that, or we'd be having a very different conversation, and
That's right.
I'd have, a congressional office behind me as we talk. So I think that's going to be one of the real challenges, is to convince people that allowing your fear to control how you vote is how we've gotten to where we are. It's
Right.
continued, it's been around for a long time, and if you think that your voting is not controlled by fear, then why do you answer me? Well, I can't allow that person to win. Instead of saying, I really like this person and I want them to win. Yeah. So we've got to have that conversation more.
Well, it's interesting that people don't recognize that even if their candidate doesn't win, let's assume for a second that it was a Libertarian and a Republican and or Democrat, just two people, and the Libertarian received 49.5% of the votes and lost. That would be a tremendous influence on the policies of the person who won, whether it be Republican or Democrat. They don't realize what they are doing is they are emboldening and empowering the status quo when they don't vote for a third party, whether it be Libertarian or otherwise. And they can't seem to wrap their heads around that. I found that incredibly frustrating because my experience was so similar to yours. I mean, we're parallel universe, and it just, I just couldn't get. Just like this lady said, she says, "I agree with everything you said, but I'm a Democrat." And what are you going to do? Little lady, 85 years old or whatever. Thank you very much, and you move on. Let me first remind our listeners that we have lines opened up, and our toll-free number is 888-773-4496. That's 888-773-4496. Whether or not you are, and when you come on, the operator will ask you to press 1, or may not ask you to press 1 if you want your voice to be heard. I mean, you can come on, your number will be on the board, but if you want to ask a question, press the 1 button, and it'll indicate that you want to ask a question. If you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't care who you are, please call in. You're not going to interrupt the program. This program is for you. We're trying to help you understand some of the free market thinking that we're talking about. All right, so it's 888-773-4496. Now, what subjects did you highlight in your campaign, and why did you select those particular subjects?
Well, we had a very interesting dynamic in the 7th District of Virginia. Many people know that Eric Cantor was primaried out by Dave Bratt, and it was largely led by a Tea Party backing. Unfortunately, when Dave Bratt came on, he almost immediately stepped into, as he's done now and he's in office, the basically Republican status quo dynamic. So it was replacing one person with another with a different name. Right. But he was able to carry that primary victory, quite clearly. So what I was trying to highlight were some of the areas and the hypocrisy of the situation there, namely the idea of promoting free market, but also being completely against immigration, wanting to kick anybody out who hasn't had a specific piece of paper filled out and destroy many local economies. It's for an economist, he really didn't understand the economic impacts of that type of decision, but it was emotionally evocative. And so everything that I wrote and everything that I posted on my campaign site, I didn't do a little 2-sentence blurb. I actually had between 1,500 and 2,500 white papers for each issue on why I took the position, what was my logic behind it. And I asked everyone, if you find fault in the logic by which I arrived at this position, please share it with me. I'm willing to have that discussion. Right. Yeah, I really am willing. And there was one where I had to revise how I had presented a piece. Now, I still support the overall concept, but understanding some of the issues that some readers had brought forward, I modified some of the position to take that into account, and it was to be true. It's not that I'm going to be, steadfast. I'm behind a position because I'm behind it, and I'm not going to give you anything. And if you can counter it, let's have that intelligent discussion. Unfortunately, most people would they would wave their hand across. Well, you're in the wrong. You just don't get it. Was what I got more than anything. And I said, right. Well, please if I don't get it, tell me what I don't get. I want to hear that so that I can correct it. So a lot of the two or three issues that came up that were really heavy at the time, the economy was the overwhelming big issue. And then there was immigration. If you remember, last summer, that was the topic that was on the news every single day. Right. And then marriage equality. That was very, very high profile, and I actually had a very personal connection to that issue as well. My youngest brother was able to marry a Navy man finally, and I can tell people, on the campaign trail when it came up, I told people to their face that I will personally tell you this relationship is no less valid, there's no less commitment than any other opposite sex marriage, and actually more so than
probably
some
more
that
so.
I've
Yeah,
met.
I was going to say probably more so. Yeah.
They have to endure a lot more to make this commitment
that
to
is
each
correct,
other.
right.
So, and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't have any impact on my commitment to my wife. It doesn't negate your marriage as being valid to allow them to have the same protections under law and the same acknowledgement on a
Right.
larger scale. Now, if you want to take marriage completely out of the government, remove all benefits that are associated
Right.
with marriage, I'm fine with taking the government out of the marriage game and allowing churches to decide if it's called marriage or union or whatever. But until we have this, if we were able to extricate that terminology from government in total, then I'd have less of an issue with it. Of course, I want to extricate almost everything from government where we can and leave the bare bones that were set up by the Constitution, but that's a whole nother matter.
Well, it seems to me, I'm probably a few years older than you, maybe 30 or 40 years older than you.
One or two.
But 30 or 40 years, what the heck, Most people say, you're still alive. How come you're still going? But to me, I have a difficult time separating the tenets of a religion and politics. It seems to be the same, because you can take anyone in any religious or persuasion, regardless of what they believe, no matter how radical it seems, and they'll justify it because it's their religion. And it seems that politics are the same way. They'll rationalize and justify anything because it's their political party. It seems like when you discuss politics, you're discussing religion. You get that same response, which doesn't speak very highly of religion, unfortunately, and really is unfair in the political arena. It seems like it's such a warped mentality that denigrates both ends. And no one sees any of that. They see this as almost pure, and they don't see it totally polluted. And that was my big frustration, because I don't get involved in when people ask me about religion. I give them a very straight answer. I say, I appreciate your position and I respect it. I said, but I'm just not. I have never been able to understand the concept of God. Although I'm a religious person. And they don't understand that. I said, I cannot grasp the concept of God, but yet I'm a very religious person. And they get all upset when I say that. And the reason why they get upset, I suspect, is because I'm not I'm not a Lutheran, Jewish, or whatever it is. I have to be in a box. If I'm not in a box, they cannot handle it. Does that speak to the mentality of Americans, or you think that occurs everywhere?
Well, I think Americans are particularly susceptible to it, and I think the media has built this up over the years because it has created. Think about if you juxtapose MSNBC versus Fox News, right? It's great on mine. I have Dish. We live out away from the city, so that's the only way we can get any of the cable channels is to have a dish set up in the yard.
Right.
But MSNBC and Fox are right next to each other on the dial.
Right.
So I can just channel up, channel down, and listen to the same conversation in opposite directions.
Right.
Media has polarized our society because they give you the answers. And if you're listening to them, you're sort of, again, it's that cognitive bias. I want someone who's going to affirm my existing thoughts. I don't want to be challenged. I don't want somebody who's going to make me think something a little bit differently than what I believe. And that's actually one of the key words, believe. And
right.
One of my favorite movies of all time is Dogma. And there's Chris Rock has a quote in there. It's just beautiful. And he says, belief is a dangerous thing. People will kill, maim for beliefs. But an idea, now that is powerful.
Right.
And that's where we are with, if it's religion, if it's politics. You can have a discussion about whether or not you like Microsoft or Apple better. And people have beliefs. They don't like to have ideas that then can be contested.
Yeah.
Makes them feel warm and fuzzy.
I'm asked to speak not often, not as often as I used to, because I'm not interested in doing that, and I don't put my name out. But I'm asked to speak on a regular basis. Many times I'll bring up the term belief, and the example that I give is that, when my wife and I, on a Saturday night, decide to go to the movies, which is rare, by the way, but we do, we're driving away, my wife would turn around to me and say, "Oh, honey, did you check the back door to see if it was locked?" Now, normally I do, because you do it rote and you're not conscious of it. And what do I say? Do I say, "Oh, absolutely, I checked it"? No, I say, "I believe I did." And when I say I believe I did, what am I saying? I really don't know.
Yeah.
And I said, what you have to understand, folks, is that when you believe, you don't know, and they get upset. I said, let me give you the second example. Next Saturday night, we're going to the movies again. For some reason, 2 weeks ago, we're going to the movies. And I remembered that when my wife asked me, "Did you check the back door?" So this time, I go around and, turn the lights off or on or whatever, and I check the back door. I said, it's locked. I get in the car. Driving away, my wife turns around to me and asks the same question. She says, "Honey, did you check to see if the back door was locked?" What do I say? Yes, I did. I know I did. I said, what's the difference between the two? One is I really don't know. One is I do know. And I said, so when we say we believe, we really don't know. And people get upset to holy hell, when I say that. And it's a shame. You're right. I think the Republican and Democrat Party, they set up this aura of belief, and which doesn't exist, and then they do what they want to do, and then we vote for them because we believe we vote for this belief system. Absolutely. Are you on the same page with that, or am I nuts?
No, that's exactly where I'm at. I think that unfortunately, when you have those conversations with people, a lot of times what you'll get is, "Well, I know it's a fact. I know this."
That's right. That's what they say. They say, "No, I know it is."
They will adopt this idea of belief, and then they will turn it into this perception of actual knowledge.
Right.
And so what I always ask people is, so what are your key points that allow you to know that? Where is your factual information? Let's take this logically. And religion is very difficult, and people get so defensive about it. And I was lucky enough that I have friends from a variety of religious backgrounds.
So do I.
And people who are very willing to basically engage in intellectual debate over a variety of very contentious topics. And we did it for fun. I mean, in college, we would sit around drinking and have some of these debates. And so you can imagine they got pretty lively, but in a good-hearted way. But this same group, I'm able to actually have these same conversations with in depth, with many fewer drinks and much more substance to the conversation. Right. And I've always had a hard time understanding how others can't have these debates without taking it as a personal confrontation. I'm not saying that you are as a person flawed because I disagree with a belief that you are holding, right, or I disagree with the logic that you've arrived at this conclusion, any more than I believe you think that I'm flawed. And then I start to realize, oh, wait a second. The reason you think I have a problem with you is because you have a problem with me thinking differently. You're not at a point where you can entertain that different idea,
right,
and not hold it against a person as a being. And that's when you really start to figure out what's wrong, is people, they will not allow differences of opinion to be held as anywhere on the same level as their own. So you are automatically a lesser person if you can't step into line and believe the same way. And that's really sad.
Yeah. We're going to stop for a moment, James, and for break. And when we come back, I'd like to ask the question why the Tea Party has not embraced the libertarian ideals that they profess to have in the first place. Just hold on. We'll be back in 1 minute. Thank you.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio.
The
Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We have as our guest today James Carr. He is a free market thinker, libertarian. And I hate to use the word libertarian again. Here we just switched sides. Isn't that nice? You are now the host of the show. Oh, here we go. Yeah. I'm going to fire all three technicians in this room right now, okay? You're all fired, guys. Can find another job. All right. And James ran for the congressional seat, 7th District, State of Virginia. And we're here talking about libertarian principles, free market principles, et cetera. And some of the obstacles that we face being outside of the mainstream, the Republican and Democratic regime type of thing. What I wanted to ask is, why hasn't the Tea Party embraced the libertarian message, and why do they embrace more of the same message? And what really upset me is when a few years ago when we had the Occupy movement, I heard these people vocalize their complaints and their tactics and what they were suggesting, their remedies, would have made things even worse than they are now. And there just seemed to be such a conflict. It was almost as if we have lost the ability to think logically.
Well, so I actually spoke with quite a few of the Tea Party groups in the area. Unfortunately, I was walking into hostile crowds, which, as you say, it doesn't make sense. Our ideologies are, on the surface, fairly well cross-connected. And
that's right.
So in the race, as I mentioned, Dave Bratt had gotten early on a lot of Tea Party backing, and it was due in large part to a few positions that he really professed loudly that many of the Tea Partiers were able to jump behind. But if you even take this back many years, which is where really the change from what the Tea Party started out to be to what it is now happened, the Tea Party was, as you said, it was all about getting rid of this overly intrusive government, taking it back, putting the power back in the hands of the people. And look at how someone like Sarah Palin basically jumping on and using that branding of the Tea Party changed the understanding of the Tea Party and actually how the Tea Party then began to act. They became what to many people were a very extreme right version of the Republican Party, where they were not. They were very libertarian to begin with. You get someone who is as clear as you get the the term hopefully isn't as offensive as some people take it, but she was a Bible-thumping neocon. That was really where she came. And so everybody started to associate the Tea Party with this extremist, very specific religious views becoming part of a government. We need to be enacting our views, enforcing our views across the world, that kind of hawkish mentality that was brought to bear. So it attracts more people of that type. And the original members of the Tea Party were very frustrated with that, and some of them actually have just disassociated with the party because now the party has changed so much. And what I found in visiting so many of these groups, I would have people come up to me afterward and they would say, I don't know why you're trying to allow the Democrat to win. We agree with you more than we agree with Dave Bratt, except for on a couple of key issues. They started to embrace this idea of immigration being drop a huge fence on the border, and anybody that crosses it, shoot them with the gun, and anybody's here legally, cart them off or shoot them. They were very belligerent about that. But aside from that, they just said, you have to understand our best way of winning is getting in and changing the Republican Party. And I said to this one person, it was really kind of sad because one of the main people in the Tea Parties in our area was actually a former Virginia Republican Committee's chair. So to me, I'm saying, well, there's not really a difference. What you've allowed to happen is the Republican Party has infiltrated you and changed you from within.
Right. That's right.
And they had a hard time accepting that. But when I walked away, I heard them sort of talking to someone else and say, I guess he just doesn't understand that we're still trying to fight the good fight. It was the whole discussion of whether or not, as a libertarian, you want to support Rand Paul. And do you think he's really going to change anything when he's embracing, Republican mainstream? I don't think so.
Yeah, I had the privilege of went down to Austin, Texas, and met with Ron Paul at a War on Terror and Drugs symposium. Greenwald was there, Balco was there, Ron Paul was there, Jacob Hornberger was there. Someone I know pretty well, but I've supported those organizations for years, financially. It's so difficult if you listen to Ron Paul and the passion he has for total freedom of the individual. It makes it nearly impossible for you to vote for a Rand Paul, without compromising your principles. I get asked this question every day. Would you? Oh, I guess you're going to vote for Rand Paul. I go, no, I'm not. They go, well, he's about the closest. It always gets to be, he's the closest person to being a libertarian, so we should do so. Now, do I agree with many of the positions he's taken? Absolutely. But then he's got to go all the way. He cannot be, you can't be half pregnant. And I tell him, if you want to be half pregnant, fine. You show me a gal that's half pregnant, I'll vote for Rand Paul. And I said, that's the way I feel about it. And I'd like to hear your comments on that. See if I'm way off base or whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I wouldn't have brought that up if I didn't kind of agree with you. The idea of Rand Paul being the closest thing to libertarian, it's this whole election cycle feels very similar to what I went through last year on a much larger scale. Dave Bratt and the Tea Party tried to brand themselves as being mostly libertarian.
Yeah.
Because they were really scared. You see this centrist libertarian group pulling away from the mainstreams, and we've seen that here in Virginia quite a bit. Well, they were very worried, especially when I was able to qualify for the ballot. There was some very interesting maneuvering on the part of the Republican Party to keep me off of. They created a special ballot, and I was only on one, not both. It was very interesting. But in his trying to annex the idea of the libertarian vote, and picking the person closest to,
right,
you saw what it was as a desperate attempt to keep their party from, like you said, what happens if a libertarian gets 10, 15, 30, 40%? Suddenly, all of those people who say you can't win are now realizing that you can, and they've lost that fear-based voting group that they keep hold of. So what Rand is doing and trying to walk this line, he's trying not to offend the Republican mainstream, which means he has to take a hawkish position. He has to be against anything that isn't Judeo-Christian mainstream. He has to speak out against, or he's going to lose a fair amount of the vote. But what's happening is fewer and fewer of the Republican base are holding strict to those views. They want to see more of this individual freedom. So they have to brand him as libertarian-ish. And really they're leveraging his dad's name more than anything else. That's the only hope they have. At the same point, what you're doing is you're seeing a lot of people who, on the other side, and I saw this, they were, while the Democratic candidate that I ran against was a very nice guy, had very great conversations with him, he had a very meek manner, and he was losing a lot of the Democratic base because he was more of a moderate. And around here, if you weren't far enough out to the extreme, you opened the door for this middle ground, which to me is great. Hey, I wanted that middle ground. That was my bread and butter. So you see right now what's happening on that national scale. You're trying to pose someone like Rand Paul, and then look what they're doing with Clinton. They're trying to present her as more of a moderate than, well, she's ever been. And everybody's trying to move towards the center in their presentation, even though nothing about their history, nothing about their specific positions give them the right to kind of claim that ground. That's what they're fighting over. They're fighting over the middle ground, that 50% that you talked about, who don't agree with or don't identify with either party, because they want individual freedoms at every level and every aspect of your life.
Right. It disturbs me that he takes his position on the war on terror the way he does, because that's the most egregious policy that we have in our government today. I had a minister on a few weeks ago, and we were on the same page with most issues, but when it came to the war on terror, it was like, nuke the bastards type thing, excuse the expression, but he didn't say that, I'm saying that. But, and I said, well, if we're, because he considered the United States to be a Christian nation, I said, well, if it's a Christian nation, I said, the major tenet of Christianity is the Ten Commandments, and of the Ten Commandments is thou shalt not kill. I mean, how do we justify sending a drone over a sovereign nation, dropping a cluster bomb in an area that we have a suspected terrorist, not someone who's been convicted of any crime, without permission of the government, throwing a bomb and then, usually killing men, women, and children, and go, oops, sorry about that, and don't even know if we even hit our target. I said, is that not murder? And he said, well, that's the war on terror. The answer was that was the war on terror. And I said, well, you can't have both ways. So this is where religion and politics, feed each other and then justify each other. I mean, they literally, you can give religion a bad name by the war on terror, because religion justifies killing, where people who are sort of a-religious, I mean, they could be spiritual in many ways, but they don't belong to any organized religion. Those people saying, hey, that's inhumane and it's wrong. And then when you say that, you say, well, you're obviously a radical and a kook. But yet if it happened to them, they'd say, oh, that's horrible. And I have so many friends, I mean, sharp guys that would say, well, we should go over there because those are bad people. I said, well, what if they had a drone here and there was a suspected terrorist of their country living here, right next door to you? I mean, this guy is in fact a terrorist and wants to go there and really wants to kill the people in that particular country. They send a drone over, drop a cluster bomb, and your wife, your daughter, and many of your friends and relatives all get killed. Guy's not home at the time. He's at work. We missed him. You just say, well, that's sort of all right. He'd say, no,
Right.
we'd go over there and nuke them. I said, but why can't we be the same? I mean, why can't you apply the same principle to both sides? And they can never answer the question. I said, if you're looking for peace, think libertarian, think free market, the right of free association. I want to be friends with everyone. I'm going to take one more second of your time. About 20 years ago, and I'll say about 20 years, so I don't know exactly when, a survey was taken by Buchanan. It was a worldwide. James Buchanan, and it was a worldwide survey trying to determine which peoples in each country favored the United States the most. And it shocked all of the statisticians because the one country that came out number one by far, that wanted to be more like the United States and work with the United States, and they would love to be a state of the United States, was Iran. And they couldn't figure that out. And it finally dawned on them the reason why Iran favored the people, not the government, they're talking about the people, favored the United States so much is because when the Shah was in power, we sort of took a hands-off approach. And people just saw all that we were able to accomplish being a relatively free society and whatever. And they wanted to be Americans. They all wanted to be Americans. And what happened as soon as that we started intervening again, guess what country hates the United States the most now? Yeah. And I said, well, isn't that sort of prima facie evidence that if you allow for free association, you don't need war? But if you don't have war, you're not making any money. The elite are not making any money. In other words, I make the money, not the people in office. Anyway, that's my rant for the day.
No, you've got, and there are 2 points that I'd like to talk about in there that I think are absolutely key in trying to talk with individuals about this breakdown in logical consistency. So the Constitution is a wonderfully worded document, as is the Declaration of Independence. And there are so many people who will quote that, and they will talk about the rule of law, and they will turn around and justify the actions that you're describing. One of the main tenets of our political system, all men are created equal. All people are created equal. And innocent until proven guilty. Right? These are two well ingrained in our system. Unfortunately, it's been bastardized with politics, but if you go back to what was set at the beginning of this country, those two concepts, I think you'll get anybody to agree with those. And then you ask them why that doesn't apply to someone from Mexico or someone from the Middle East or someone in the middle of North Vietnam. Why do they not get the same rights? If we're going to say that these rights have been endowed by the Creator. Well, guess what? If you have a specific religion that says all men are created by a particular being, that applies to everyone, whether or not they happen to believe in the same Creator that you do.
Right.
If you take everything from a principled stance and apply it across the board, every right that we have enumerated in our Constitution applies to everyone in the world. We should not be bombing people that have not gone through, a due process and been convicted by a jury of their peers. That's not how we should be operating. And you have such a hard time with people absorbing that. They really, it's almost like it's too many cognitive dissonance for them to really process at once, and so they shut down. And so then I say, okay, well, let's shift gears. Because you talked about the Christian nation thing, which I will argue very clearly that we are not a Christian nation.
Correct, I agree.
We are a nation that happens to have a majority of Christian citizens at this point. And that distinction is key. Because I started telling them, what do you think happens in the demographics of the world if Christianity, what you're saying by allowing your religion to create the laws of the nation and have a profound impact on the rule of everyone else's life, your religious views get to create laws that determine how your neighbor lives. Well, what happens when the demographics of the nation change and we're now a nation of Muslims or a nation of Buddhists or a nation of atheists, and they get to determine laws that you have to live under.
Right.
Do you agree with that? And also, no, well, that'll never happen. Well, but we're talking in theory. Our construct of our government was set up such that that could never happen. But as soon as you set that dangerous precedent that the majority gets to override that constitutional separation, you're screwed.
Well, see, that's why we have immigration laws, so we don't let those other type of people in. And it has become so convoluted. It's unfortunately laughable, but it's sad at the same time. There can be no conversation because no one wants to exercise any sort of logic or principle, and they all want they all want the principle of free association, provided they associate with people that they agree with. And I go, wait, that's not. You can't pick and choose that, you know. It was interesting when I was on commercial radio. I had a fellow who just came back from Afghanistan because I was really blasting the war on terror. I was brutal, you know. And of course, the station I was on, KFAQ, was a real neocon station. They didn't like my position at all, although I had a top-rated program, and they couldn't get rid of me because I was the draw, you know. And they didn't realize that people were saying, you know, we need a different thinking, you know. And this fellow from Afghanistan called in, soldier rather, he was just came back, and he disagreed with me. And I said, well, his name was Mike. I never forget. I said, oh, Mikey, I said, I got a question for you. I said, in your opinion, does the government lie always, most of the time, sometimes rarely, or never? And what was really striking is that there was not 1 second hesitation between the end of my question and his answer. I said, never. He said, always. I mean, it took me back. And there was silence for about 3 or 4 seconds. And he went, I guess I see. He said, I see your point. And he hung up. And it was the most amazing telephone call I ever had. Here, a guy who just came back, defended his position in the whole bit. And when I asked him that one simple question, and he came out, and I don't think he gave it any thought, but that's the way he felt, always, because that was his experience. Going to Afghanistan, he realized it was all a lie. He brought this back, and he was being honest. And I think it shocked him more than it shocked me.
Yep. Well, what's great is because you caught him in a moment of with his guard down, a conversation had been going on, and you ask him a question like that is so pivotal in all of his previous responses. His previous responses were sort of contingent on the belief that the government is telling you the truth, right? And I've asked several people that, and almost anything that comes out of the governmental offices, you can be assured has been scrubbed and is put out in a very particular way to get the public to think something very specific. Right. Even the statistics get scrubbed. And by the way, I'm a numbers guy, have been for a long time. I work with just enormous data sets. And one of my favorite quotes from a previous colleague was, if you give me a large enough data set, I can tell you anything, and I can prove to you that the data backs that. And what I'm saying is, it's all in how you apply it. The Occam's razor kind of approach, well, you could take that razor and slice the data a few different ways and get vastly different answers. And that's why both parties get the same data sets and can prove to you beyond the shadow of a doubt, if you believe them, if you believe that their analysis is unbiased, believe beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is the only answer. And that kind of a question, it's one of those pivotal ones. Do you actually believe everything that is kind of your statement previously is contingent upon, because it all came from a government source? And as soon as somebody says, well, the government always lies, and the fact that he was able to process it that fast, that it just matriculated to every one of his answers, and he's like, oh, okay, time to go. Yeah. That's impactful.
Don't we have? Didn't we box ourselves in? We only have about 5 minutes to go, and this thing, it really boggles my mind, is that now that so much of our manufacturing capacity, in fact, I think last month the manufacturing index went up went up very slightly, or was down slightly. I'm not sure exactly the figure, but it was infinitesimal. It was very small. But military manufacturing, planes and bombs and stuff like that, was up 112.6% or something like that. If we in fact retracted and said, okay, we're not going to intrude with other countries. We're going to bring our soldiers home. We're going to provide for the national defense. Wouldn't our economy, at least initially, totally collapse?
I've heard that over and over.
I'm not long term, but I'm talking initially.
No. Are we going to, at the same time that we bring them back and we turn down that specific manufacturing, get rid of that budget that's sitting out there that is more than the 6 countries behind us combined in defense spending, which is really War Department spending? If we take that out of the taxes, that money's actually back in the economy in a different way. And for those manufacturing groups, don't we say we've got so many companies that are farming jobs overseas, all these manufacturing? Yes, there's retooling, et cetera, involved. I understand military manufacturing's relatively specialized, but it doesn't have to be. One of the great things, whether or not you like the military-industrial complex or not, they're very smart businessmen. They understand how to make a profit providing something that's needed. Well, needed because there's a view that somebody wants this. That's the military purchases that we've made. It's not these companies forcing our government to buy that. It's our government saying, hey, we've got $600 billion, $800 billion. We're closing on $1 trillion within the next couple of years if we don't stop it, to spend this year on our military, and a large part of that's going to be manufacturing. So, of course, companies are going to step up to offer those services. If that's no longer there, they're going to find other services to offer. There may be a little bit, there's definitely, with any change, you're going to have that accordion effect, right? It's going to kind of stretch a few things out, and then it's going to get cramped as they start to ramp up. You're going to see this huge boom. And people don't like to play that long-term game. They don't like to think past a simplistic initial reaction.
Yeah.
And it's sad. Unfortunately, we have a few economists that take that very jaded short-term view as well, and they've convinced a lot of people that that's the
It's
only
going to be a
answer.
hell of an adjustment because I have an occupational health testing company I started 25 years ago, and we're about the largest in Oklahoma now. And I don't work. It's a hard job, very difficult. I always tell them when I find someone I truly dislike, I'm going to sell them the whole company cheap. It's a real tough business to be in. But I was at this one company, I think it was called Matrix Services, and they were making all these metal sheets, and we do hearing testing, physicals, and drug testing, all that stuff. And I asked one of the plant manager, I said, "What are you making all these sheets for?" Because they had ramped up the number of employees. They went all the way down to like 34, and they went all the way up to like 100 and something. And he says, "Those are shields for Humvees." And I thought to myself, my goodness gracious, if we weren't building those things, all of these, 75 people with good paying jobs, manufacturing jobs, would be out of work. They would have to find something else to do. And I can see where that's a concern. But we make those adjustments, but once we make the adjustments, then we get back into the real groove of a real economy, and everyone gains and grows. Right now, we're getting a paycheck, but it's coming from the government. We're being taxed to do it. We're going into debt, and we're making things worse. It looks good, runs bad type thing, And we need something to look bad but runs good. We have about one minute to go. James, this has been great. I really appreciate your being on a program. You've been a terrific guest. In fact, we soon are going to install, as soon as I get my technicians to all agree, to have a 4-way split on the screen, so I can be a moderator and have 3 other people on, and we hope to have that maybe within the next month. And I'd like to invite you back and be one of the spokesmen, if you will, for on a debate. If you'd be so good to return to our program.
Oh yeah, that sounds great. Just let me know when.
Love to have you back. Now, I want to give you the next 30 seconds to close out and promote if you have anything that you'd like to tell our listeners about.
Well, what I'd like to just tell everyone is you do not have to conform to some predefined concept of a politician to make an impact. It's not going to be easy. Nobody pretends that it is, but nothing that's worth it normally is very easy. Spend the time, inform yourself, and then get out there, start talking to people, because who knows, you may be the one that actually gets elected for the first time outside of one of these two major parties, and right. You may be that beginning of the snowball that really starts the change.
Right. Okay. James, thank you so much for being our program. We really appreciate you taking your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can support the Charge of Freedom by recommending this program to your friends, but let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.